A single sentence can be like striking a match in a dark room. Suddenly, everything changes. For Emma Hart, a 24-year-old waitress drowning beneath the weight of her mother's hospital bills, that sentence came out of her mouth before she even knew she'd spoken it. For Grant Prescott, a billionaire whose empire insulated him from the messy weight of ordinary lives, that sentence was a crack in the marble wall of his family's century-old legacy. What followed would unravel secrets, betrayals, and a ghost his dynasty had buried so deep, they were certain no one would ever dig it back up. The diner that never slept. The corner booth. Diner sat under a buzzing neon sign that never quite lit evenly. One letter always flickered out, as though it too was tired. Inside, the air smelled of scorched coffee, grilled onions, and the faint chemical tang of disinfectant that clung to the stainless steel counter. It was the smell of survival, of long nights and short tips. At 9:10 p.m., on a Tuesday, the place was in its lull between dinner rush and late-night regulars. The jukebox wheezed out an old country ballad, and the only real noise was the hum of fluorescent bulbs and the soft clatter of forks against ceramic. Emma leaned her elbow on the counter, rolling her stiff shoulder. Every joint ached, not from just this shift, but from too many double shifts. It was a tiredness that went deeper than muscle, the kind that comes from watching a loved one slip away in a sterile hospital bed, knowing each minute of care cost money you didn't have. She rubbed her eyes, pushed back a strand of hair that had escaped her ponytail, and reminded herself she only had 2 hours left before she could rush to the hospital. The bell above the door chimed. The predator in a suit. The moment the man stepped inside, the diner seemed to hush as if the air itself braced for his presence. He wasn't just another well-dressed businessman. He carried himself like he owned the ground he walked on. His charcoal gray suit looked like it had been cut by a surgeon's scalpel. His shoes gleamed even under the diner's tired lights, and his expression was cool, indifferent, untouchable. Patrons instinctively lowered their voices. Even the fry cook peeked out from the kitchen window. The man chose the booth in the corner, the cracked vinyl seat that gave the diner its name. He moved with the economy of someone who was used to others making way. Emma grabbed a menu and a glass of water. Pasting on the professional smile she had worn so long, it felt like another mask. "Welcome to the corner booth. Can I get you started with something to drink?" The man didn't look at the menu. His eyes, icy blue, unsettlingly clear, lifted to meet hers for one heartbeat before sliding away. His voice was low, resonant, with the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. "Coffee, black." "Coming right up," Emma said, retreating to the counter. The whisper about power. Her co-worker Kayla Brooks sidled up beside her, balancing a tray of empty mugs. Kayla's grin was conspiratorial. "Get a load of Mr. Moneybags. $10 says that's Grant Prescott." Emma blinked. "Who?" Kayla rolled her eyes. "Prescott Holdings. They own half the skyline downtown. My dad used to work on one of their sites before layoffs. That guy's been on the cover of every business magazine before he was 30. Ruthless. Untouchable." Emma glanced back at the booth. The man's profile was sharp, severe. His gaze fixed out the window like a predator resting between hunts. "Well," she muttered, pouring the coffee, "to me he's just another customer who wants caffeine." Still, her hand shook slightly as she carried the cup over. The ring. She set the coffee down with practiced grace. "Here you go, sir." As he reached for the cup, his sleeve slid back. The light caught on a ring. Emma's breath caught. It wasn't the diamond size or the expensive shine that froze her. It was the design. A signet ring, buttery gold, carved with feathers that seemed to twine around the band. On its flat face was a phoenix, wings spread wide, and in its eye, a tiny sapphire glittered like a captured star. For a moment, the diner disappeared. Emma saw her mother's nightstand. She saw the small velvet box, edges worn, holding the one possession her mother had never let go, the same ring, down to the impossible blue of that sapphire. It was the thing Linda Hart refused to sell, even as medical bills swallowed them whole. The ring her mother said had been given to her by her father, Emma's grandfather, on his deathbed. It's a promise, Emma. A promise of what's right. The words slipped out of her before she could stop them. Sir, my mother has a ring just like yours. The freeze Grant Prescott froze, his hand hovering above the coffee. Slowly, he pulled it back. His blue eyes snapped to hers with sudden glacial intensity. The casual dismissal was gone. What remained was a stare so sharp, it felt like he was dissecting her, trying to locate the lie. Excuse me? His voice was softer now, but dangerous. Emma's heart thudded. Kayla watched from across the diner, her face pale. Emma should have laughed it off, should have walked away, but the image of her mother's frail fingers clutching that same ring blazed too hot to ignore. The ring, Emma stammered, pointing with a trembling hand. On your finger. My mother's is identical. The phoenix, the sapphire eye, everything. Something unreadable flickered across his face, hard, cold. Not surprise, but calculation. He turned his hand, studied the ring as though seeing it for the first time, then looked back at her. That's impossible. His tone was final, a verdict. This ring has been in the Prescott family for more than a century. Commissioned for my great-grandfather. There is no other. There has never been another. You are mistaken. The slap of his certainty stung. Emma felt exhaustion and fear and indignation combust into defiance. I'm not mistaken, she whispered fiercely. I've held it in my hands 1,000 times. I could sketch every detail from memory. A faint smile tugged at his lips, cruel and condescending. A fascinating story. What is your name? Emma. Emma Hart. Well, Miss Hart, he said, lifting the coffee cup and taking a slow, deliberate sip. Your mother is either a liar or a thief, because the only way she possesses a ring like this is if it was stolen from my family 50 years ago. The cup clicked against the saucer. The sound echoed in Emma's chest like a gunshot. The dismissal, stolen. The word tasted poisonous. Her mother, Linda, who once walked 3 blocks to return a store's extra change, called a thief? Grant reached into his jacket, withdrew a leather wallet, and placed 3 crisp $100 bills on the table. For the coffee and your time. It was more money than Emma made in 2 shifts, but in this moment, it was nothing but insult. Grant stood, towering over the small booth, his presence crowding the air. He was already gone in his mind, moving on, leaving Emma in the rubble of his words. At the door, he paused. She's not a thief, Emma managed to choke out, her voice shaking but unbroken. He didn't turn. Then prove it. The bell chimed, the door shut, and he was gone. The box beside the hospital bed. The diner's hum became a scream in Emma's ears. The 3 bills on the table looked like blood money. Later, she drove through the blur of traffic lights, every red and green flashing against her wet eyes. Grant Prescott's words replayed like a curse. A liar or a thief. By the time she reached the hospital, her chest was tight with dread. The sterile corridors smelled of bleach. The beeping monitor outside her mother's room was steady, fragile, reassuring. On the nightstand sat the small blue velvet box. Emma's hands trembled as she opened it. There it was, the same pale gold, the same phoenix, the same sapphire eye glimmering with secrets. Emma, Linda's voice was weak, raspy. Emma shut the box quickly and turned with a smile too bright to be real. Hey, Mom. Sorry, didn't mean to wake you. Her mother's eyes, clouded by illness but still fierce, rested on her. Rough shift? The usual. Linda's gaze drifted to the velvet box in Emma's hands. The exhaustion in her face sharpened into something guarded. You were looking at the ring. Emma hesitated. I was just thinking about Grandpa, about Dad. Your grandfather, Linda corrected softly. It was my father, Owen Carter, who gave it to me. Not your dad. Emma's mind whirled. Her mother's voice was fading, but her words were iron. He said it was a promise of what's right. Some doors, Emma, are best left closed. But Emma couldn't close the door now. Not after Grant Prescott had flung it open with a single word, stolen. And not after he had left her with the command that now echoed in her veins, like a challenge she couldn't ignore. The penthouse and the family folio Grant Prescott stood in his glass-walled penthouse on the 80th floor, the city glittering below like a kingdom he owned. Usually, that view filled him with pride. Tonight, it felt like thin ice beneath his feet. He carried a glass of scotch to his desk, but didn't drink it. Instead, he unlocked the bottom drawer and retrieved a leather-bound folio, The Prescott Family Archives. It was a curated story, polished to shine like marble, but it was all he had. He flipped to the section on heirlooms. There it was, a photograph of his ring. The entry described it as the Phoenix Signet, commissioned in 1922 by Alaric Prescott, crafted by Parisian artisan Michel Dubois. Unique design, singular heirloom, symbol of the Prescott family's rise from the ashes. His father had placed it on his finger at 21, saying, "It represents our resilience. We always rise." But tonight, resilience felt less like truth and more like propaganda. Grant pulled out his phone. "Jenna," he said when his fixer answered. On the other end, Jenna Alvarez's clipped voice was as steady as steel. "Still awake? I need a background check. Quiet, thorough. On what company this time?" "Not a company, a person. Two, actually. Emma Hart, Linda Hart, and most importantly, Linda's father. His name was Owen Carter. I want everything. Employment, family, financials, associates, every scrap." There was a pause, and for once Jenna let her curiosity slip. "Is this personal or professional?" Grant stared at the ring on his finger. "I don't know yet, but it could be problematic." A waitress, with a notebook. Across town, Emma sat in the hospital cafeteria, notebook open, coffee untouched. Her mother was sleeping upstairs, her breath shallow but steady. Emma sketched the ring from memory, each feather etched into the band, the sharp curve of the phoenix's wings, the sapphire eye. She had drawn it countless times as a child, tracing the lines while her mother read poetry aloud. Now she was sketching it for survival, like a map leading out of a maze. The words, liar or thief, still rang in her ears. But she clung to her mother's certainty. It was a promise. If the billionaire thought he could dismiss them with cash and insults, he was wrong. Emma Hart had grown up fighting for scraps. She wasn't about to surrender her mother's honor. The first name. 3 days later, Grant's phone buzzed with an encrypted text. One line, Owen Carter. No further context. A ghost of a name. Grant immediately fed it into the private Prescott databases. Employee records, contractors, financial partners spanning a century. Nothing. Not one hit. Too clean. A chill crawled up his spine. He knew cover-ups. This smelled like one. That evening, Jenna Alvarez walked into his office in a slate-gray suit, holding a slim folder. She didn't bother with greetings. "You're not going to like this." Grant opened the folder. Inside was a birth certificate, Linda Ann Carter, born Wilmington, Delaware. Father, Owen Carter. Mother, Helen Carter. Then another document. A patent application, 1968. Invention, high-torque gearing system for industrial turbines. Inventor, Owen Carter. Application withdrawn. Beneath it, a bank record, October 14, 1968. A one-time deposit of $50,000 into Carter's account. 2 days after the patent withdrawal. Finally, a death certificate, Owen Carter, heart attack, 1974. Age 42. The first crack, Grant's jaw tightened. He recognized the schematic in the patent drawing. It was crude but unmistakable. a primitive version of the Prescott Mark III turbine, the invention credited to his grandfather William that had catapulted the family from local player to global empire in the 1970s. He looked at Jenna. So he was bought off. More like paid to disappear, Jenna said flatly. The $50,000 was disguised as a consulting fee, which made it legal. But there's no official paper trail linking Carter's design to William Prescott's patent. It was clean. Too clean. Grant swallowed the bitter taste in his throat. His grandfather had been meticulous. He'd thought the Prescott story was ruthless, but honest. This wasn't ruthlessness. This was theft. And if the heart still had a ring identical to his, then it wasn't just about turbines. It was about bloodlines. Collision on the sidewalk. That night, the diner was nearly closed when Emma stepped out into the cool air, apron slung over her arm. She froze when she saw him. Grant Prescott. He wasn't in his surgical suit this time, but even in a cashmere sweater and dark trousers, he radiated power. He stood in the doorway as if he'd been waiting. "Miss Hart," he said, voice quiet but carrying. Kayla hovered at the counter inside, eyes wide. "Emma, you don't have to." "It's fine," Emma said, her stomach tightening. She stepped outside. Grant didn't waste time. "Your grandfather. His name was Owen Carter." Emma flinched. "How do you know that?" "He was an engineer. In 1968, he filed a patent for a turbine gear system, a design my grandfather used to build the Prescott fortune." Emma's mind blanked. She knew fragments. Her mother spoke of Owen's brilliance, but never of his work. "I don't know anything about that," she said truthfully. Grant's voice sharpened. "Or maybe your mother does. Here's what I think." Carter withdrew his patent, accepted hush money, and vanished. That's not theft, Miss Hart. That's a business deal. The cruelty of it, the cynicism, knocked the air from her lungs. Emma's eyes burned. "You think this is about money?" Her voice rose with anger. "My mother is fighting for her life in a hospital bed, and you stand here in your $1,000 sweater and call her father a sellout. This isn't about money. This is about his honor, his work, and you just admitted your family stole it." For the first time, Grant looked unsettled. She saw it, the faint crack in his armor. Emma pressed forward. "My grandfather told my mother the ring was proof that he'd been wronged. He didn't sell out. He was threatened, forced to sign away his life's work to protect his family. That money wasn't a payment. It was hush money." The words poured out of her, fueled by years of her mother's unspoken sorrow. Grant was silent, blue eyes searching her face. His certainty wavered, if only for a moment. Then he turned sharply. "There were 2 rings," he muttered, almost to himself. "And Daniel." "Daniel?" Emma asked. But Grant was already walking away into the night. The mansion of ghosts. The next evening, Grant drove out of the city to the Prescott family estate, a sprawling stone mansion that smelled of old varnish and secrets. He hated coming here. It felt like a mausoleum. In the library, he found Richard Prescott, his cousin, lounging by the fire with a brandy. Richard, all charm and easy smiles, managed the family's charitable foundation, a perfect cover for a life of privilege. "Grant," Richard exclaimed, "to what do we owe the honor? Tired of skyscrapers?" "I need information," Grant cut in, "about our great-uncle Daniel." Richard's smile faltered briefly before returning. "Daniel? The black sheep? That old ghost story? Why dig him up?" "Because I have reason to believe he was real and important." Richard swirled his brandy. "The legend goes he tried to steal Alaric's ideas, failed, and vanished with a ring and company secrets. Betrayed the family, pure and simple. Why the sudden interest? Some descendant sniffing around for a handout?" His casual words carried a sharp edge. Grant's instincts prickled. Richard leaned back. "If you want to dig, the old correspondence is in the West Wing study. But don't be surprised if the ghost you find is uglier than you imagine. The memo hours." Later, in the dusty study, Grant sifted through boxes of letters tied with faded ribbons. Most were dry business notes. Then he found them. A series of reports addressed to his grandfather's head of security. Surveillance updates on Owen Carter, where his daughter played, where his wife shopped, and then a final chilling line. Subject Carter has been neutralized. Asset secured. He is no longer a threat. Grant's stomach dropped. Neutralized. Among the papers lay a separate note, frantic, nearly illegible, in William Prescott's own hand. He knows. Found him. Daniel is the key. Must protect the name. The cracks widened. Grant leaned back in the dusty chair, the memo shaking slightly in his hand. It wasn't just a stolen invention. It wasn't just hush money. This was targeted surveillance, coercion, erasure. And somehow it all tied back to Daniel, the family ghost no one dared speak about. The Prescott empire was beginning to look less like resilience and more like rot. And Emma Hart, with her trembling defiance in a cheap diner, had just forced him to see it. A mother's story. Told at last. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wilted flowers. Emma sat at her mother's bedside, her heart pounding with everything she had discovered in the past 2 days. "Mom," she whispered, "we can't keep dancing around this. No more secrets. Please, tell me what really happened with Grandpa." Linda Hart closed the book of poetry resting on her lap. Her eyes, though clouded by illness, flashed with the weight of memory. "I knew this day would come," she said, voice raspy but resolute. "I prayed it wouldn't, but I knew. Emma, your grandfather was a genius, a gentleman who believed the world worked on merit and fairness. He developed his turbine design on his own time, his masterpiece. And he made the mistake of trusting the wrong colleague. That man left his company for Prescott Industries. 6 months later, 2 men showed up at our kitchen table. Her hand trembled as she reached for Emma's. They laid out photographs," Linda continued. "Me, at school. My mother walking home from the market. They told your grandfather what a beautiful family he had. And they told him what a shame it would be if something happened to us. Then they slid contracts across the table. A non-disclosure agreement, a transfer of rights, and an envelope thick with cash." Emma's throat closed. "They didn't hurt him?" "No," Linda said bitterly. "They didn't need to. They broke him without touching him." He signed. We packed and left town a week later. He never worked as an engineer again. He died at 42, Emma. But the truth? He died that night, at the kitchen table. Tears blurred Emma's vision. "And the ring? Where does the ring come in?" Linda flinched. Her eyes darted to the small velvet box on the nightstand. "After the persuaders left, your grandfather fell into despair. Then one man sought him out. He called himself Daniel. He said he'd been betrayed by powerful blood of his own. He knew what it was like to be erased. They became friends. Before he left town, he gave your grandfather the ring. He said it belonged to the wronged, not the wrongdoer. He said one day the phoenix would rise again, for the right person." Emma's heart pounded. Daniel, the name that haunted every corner of the Prescott archives. An uneasy alliance. Later that night, Emma found herself in the hospital cafeteria again. This time she wasn't alone. Grant Prescott sat across from her, placing a thin folder on the table between them. His usual arrogance was stripped away. He looked older, heavier. "Your mother was right," he admitted quietly. "My grandfather had her family watched. He forced Owen Carter to sign. These are surveillance reports." Emma's hands shook as she opened the folder. Pages of cold, clinical notes. Subject's daughter observed at schoolyard. Wife picked up groceries. It was proof. Proof of intimidation. She looked up, eyes blazing. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because my story is crumbling too," Grant said. "And there's more. I found a note in my grandfather's own hand. He knows. Found him. Daniel is the key. Must protect the name. I don't know what it means, but I think your grandfather and mine were both caught in something bigger. And it all goes back to Daniel. Emma clenched her fists. Then we find out who he was. Paris, 1922. An hour later, Emma stood in a place she never imagined. Grant's high-rise office. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the city below. On the massive screen that spanned one wall, Grant pulled up a digitized page from the Dubois Atelier ledger in Paris. Elegant, spidery French handwriting filled the screen, with a neat English translation scrolling alongside. Commission, 1922. Client, Alaric Prescott. 2 identical Phoenix signet rings. One for the builder, one for the... Emma leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Wait, that's wrong. Grant frowned. What do you mean? The translation. It doesn't say dreamer. Emma pointed at the French words. Gardien de l'âme. That means guardian of the soul. The room fell silent. Guardian of the soul, Grant repeated slowly, tasting the words. Not a dreamer, a guardian. The implication landed like thunder. The 2 rings weren't made for rivals. They were made for partners. 2 halves of a whole. A builder of empire and a guardian of its soul. The Prescott legend, that Daniel had been a traitor, suddenly looked like fabrication. The annotation. Look, Grant murmured, zooming further into the page. There was a marginal note in a different hand, dated 1945. The script, faded but legible, read, received a letter from Mr. Daniel Prescott. Request, modify second ring, to be inscribed inside the band. He is no longer a Prescott. He is now. The note cut off, but one word was clear. Owen. Emma gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Owen. My grandfather's name. Grant shook his head. No, look at the date. 1945. Your grandfather wouldn't meet Daniel until the 1960s. This inscription isn't about Owen Carter. He tapped the genealogy file on his laptop, fingers flying across the keys. My great-grandfather, Alaric Prescott, had 2 sons. At least that's what the official record says. William, my grandfather, born 1925. But look here. On the screen appeared a black and white photograph. 2 young men, proud, handsome, standing side by side. One was clearly Alaric Prescott. The other, labeled Daniel Prescott, 1921. Underneath the caption, the full name appeared. Daniel Owen Prescott, the shattering truth. Emma's knees weakened. Owen. It wasn't my grandfather. It was his own middle name. Daniel Owen Prescott. Grant's face went pale. The second ring wasn't a spare. It was Daniel's ring. He had it inscribed with his middle name when he abandoned the family name entirely. The guardian of the soul. Cast out. Erased. Emma whispered, so when he gave it to my grandfather, it wasn't just a token of sympathy. He was passing down evidence. A piece of himself. Grant scrolled through the birth years again, mind racing. Daniel, born 1905. Alaric the builder was younger. Daniel was the elder son. By bloodline, by tradition, Daniel should have been the heir, not Alaric. Which means, Emma's eyes widened. The entire Prescott legacy rests on a lie. Grant's voice was grim. Exactly. My grandfather William wasn't just protecting a fortune. He was covering up the fact that our dynasty was built on stolen inheritance. Daniel Owen Prescott was erased, so Alaric could rule. And when Daniel befriended Owen Carter, when he gave him the ring, my grandfather panicked. Because Daniel was the key, the one person who could shatter the myth of legitimacy. Emma clutched the velvet box at her side. Inside it lay the second Phoenix ring, inscribed with a name meant to survive erasure, a shared resolution. The office was silent except for the city's hum far below. 2 people sat facing each other, one the heir to a fortune, the other a waitress with nothing but a mother's honor to defend. Yet in this moment, they were bound by the same fire. Emma broke the silence. My mother said the ring was a promise. Now I understand. It wasn't just about our family. It was about his family, too. About the truth. Grant's jaw tightened. For once, his arrogance was gone. Richard knows, my cousin. He's been waiting for his chance to use this secret as a weapon. If we don't act, he'll bury it or twist it. Emma's eyes hardened. Then we act. Together. Not just to defend my grandfather's honor. To defend Daniel's. To defend the truth. Grant nodded once, sharply. The Prescott Foundation Gala. Richard's stage, his safe ground. If he wants to play host, we'll make it his trial. Builder and guardian Grant removed his ring, setting it on the table beside the file. Emma pulled the velvet box from her bag and placed the second Phoenix ring next to it. The two rings gleamed in the lamplight, twin flames of gold, separated for nearly a century, reunited at last. One for the builder, Emma whispered, and one for the guardian of the soul, Grant finished. For the first time in his life, Grant Prescott looked at the emblem of his family, not as a symbol of pride, but as a reminder of responsibility. And for the first time in hers, Emma Hart looked at the same emblem, not as a burden of suspicion, but as proof that her family had never been thieves, only custodians of a truth too dangerous to be spoken. The stage was set. The lie of the Prescott dynasty was about to face the one thing it had evaded for a century, the light of public reckoning, the ballroom of illusions. The grand ballroom of the Prescott Foundation Gala sparkled with chandeliers and false brilliance. Waiters in black vests glided between donors clutching champagne flutes, and giant LED screens looped a glossy highlight reel of charity projects. To the outside world, this was the Prescott family's benevolent face. Wealth turned to generosity. At the center of it all stood Richard Prescott, radiant in a tuxedo, shaking hands and exchanging air kisses with socialites. He was in his element, basking in the adoration that came with playing host to the city's elite. But his smile faltered when he noticed Grant Prescott striding through the crowd, Emma Hart at his side. And behind them, moving slowly in a wheelchair, came Linda Hart. Her face was pale, but her eyes were aflame. The ripple of whispers moved through the ballroom like wind across tall grass, the voice of the victim. Richard's practiced grin hardened into a brittle mask. "Grant," he greeted, his voice sugary and sharp. "And guests. What a surprise." "Not a surprise," Grant said coldly. "A reckoning." Emma felt her pulse race as Grant stepped aside. Linda Hart gripped the microphone mounted on the stage podium. Her hand trembled, but her voice, though thin, rang out across the glittering hall. "Your fairy tale cost my father his life." The ballroom froze. Forks hovered in midair, champagne glasses stilled. All eyes turned to the frail woman in the wheelchair. "My father, Owen Carter," Linda continued, "was a brilliant engineer. He created the design that made this family's fortune. He was threatened, coerced, silenced, and when he died broken. Also, the Prescotts could build an empire on his grave." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The evidence on the screens. Emma stepped forward, holding up her phone. The massive LED screens behind the stage flickered, and then the carefully prepared charity slideshow vanished. In its place appeared the Paris ledger page, Alaric Prescott's commission for 2 identical Phoenix rings. The camera zoomed in on the French phrase, "Un pour le bâtisseur, un pour le gardien de l'âme." One for the builder, one for the guardian of the soul. Then came the marginal note. Received a letter from Daniel Prescott, 1945. Request. Inscription, Owen. The audience murmured, shifting uneasily in their tuxedos and gowns. And finally, an image of William Prescott's frantic scrawl. "He knows. Found him. Daniel is the key. Must protect the name." The screens glared with undeniable proof. Grant's confession. Grant took the microphone. His voice was steady, resonant. carrying across the ballroom with the weight of generations. My family's legacy, he declared, is built on a lie my grandfather silenced an innocent man to protect, and a lie my cousin, he turned toward Richard, his eyes like knives, intended to exploit for his own gain. Murmurs erupted. Cameras from journalists and guests alike captured every word. The hot mic. Richard tried to laugh it off, but the sound rang hollow. He stepped forward, snatching a microphone from a startled MC. "You fool, Grant," he hissed, his voice rising in anger. "Do you think you're noble? You and your pathetic little waitress have ruined everything. I kept this secret buried for years. I protected us. I was going to control it, use it, and keep the dynasty intact. And now you've destroyed it all." He didn't notice that the microphone was live. His confession echoed through the sound system, every venomous word magnified for the hushed audience. Phones shot up, recording. Gasps filled the room. Richard's face went pale as he realized too late what he had done. The collapse. The fallout was instant. Reporters whispered furiously, typing notes, transmitting footage. Donors edged away from Richard as though the scandal were contagious. Board members exchanged furious, terrified looks. Richard Prescott stood alone in the center of the ballroom, his composure shattered, the fortress of his charm reduced to rubble. For the first time, the dynasty's untouchable facade cracked wide open. And into that silence stepped Emma Hart, her voice quiet but firm. "This isn't about destroying a family. It's about honoring those they tried to erase. The builder and the guardian, my grandfather and Daniel. Their truth deserves daylight, aftermath, and rebuilding." The weeks that followed were a storm of headlines. Prescott Dynasty exposed. Fortune built on stolen invention. Cousins' hot mic confession rocks empire. Stockholders demanded resignations. Lawsuits piled high. Richard Prescott vanished from public life in disgrace. But amidst the chaos, something new took root. In a sunlit private hospital suite, Linda Hart sat by the window, color slowly returning to her cheeks. A lifetime of carrying her father's secret had been lifted. For the first time in years, she looked at peace. Grant entered quietly, no longer the untouchable tycoon, but a man humbled by truth. In his hands, he carried a leather-bound document. He placed it on the bedside table. The words on the cover gleamed in gold. The Daniel Owen Prescott Foundation. "It will fund inventors and artists," he explained. "The kind of people my family once crushed. A significant portion of our fortune will be the endowment, and the estate of Owen Carter will be its honorary first beneficiary." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. Her mother's hand trembled as she laid it over Grant's. "You have honored him," Linda whispered. "You've honored them all." The rings reunited Grant reached into his pocket and pulled off the phoenix ring from his own hand. He placed it on the table beside Linda's velvet box. Emma opened the box and lifted out the second ring, the Guardian's ring. She set it beside Grant's. The two golden phoenixes gleamed side by side at last, twin flames reunited after a century apart. "One for the builder," Emma murmured, "and one for the guardian of the soul," Grant said softly, meeting her gaze. He held her eyes, his voice low but filled with conviction. "I can rebuild the company, but for a century it's been missing its soul. Help me bring it back, Emma." It was not an offer of money or power. It was an offer of purpose. Emma felt the weight of the rings, the echoes of her grandfather's pain, and the hope of something new. "Yes," she said firmly, "let's give them a legacy worth believing in." The final rising. A careless sentence in a cheap diner had set the chain of events in motion. "My mother has a ring just like yours." That sentence had exposed lies buried for generations. It had forced a billionaire to face the rot beneath his family's marble facade. It had given a dying woman the justice she had been denied. and it had reunited two rings forged in hope and tainted by greed, restoring them to their true meaning. The phoenix, long buried in ash, had risen again. And in its rising, Emma Hart and Grant Prescott discovered the truth that no fortune could buy. Real wealth isn't what you inherit. It's the integrity you choose to build.